first question. Despite the presidential duties being so broad, what do you believe to be the most important duty that a president should fulfill? And how do you plan to manage constantly being responsible for everything, despite it not being your job to coordinate every event?
So for the first part, I believe that since the president is the main authority figure in a board, while they are the person that people look to, their duty is also to their members, board and GBMers. So I believe that what their duty is to make sure that everyone else is running smoothly, but also having to maintain themselves so that they don't reach any burnout while they're taking care of others, because again, you have to take care of yourself before you take care of others. And can you repeat the second part of the question, please?
And how do you plan to manage constantly being responsible for everything, despite it not being your job to coordinate every event?
So again, with the president, they're more of a guide and a motivator that doesn't necessarily hold their hands when it comes to them having to do their bylaws or planning events. And while the president is there as a resource and facilitator, how do I put this? It would depend on, I guess, how much the branch members are willing to take. And in the end, it's important to communicate when it's becoming too much, because even the president it's okay for the president to ask for help sometimes and communicate that not everything can be put on them. So it's also about balance and learning how to cope with how much you can take.
Your second question, APSA is one of, if not the largest student organization outside of Greek frats and sororities, and APSA is therefore kind of a very powerful voice towards any campus-wide issues or referendum. How will you use and mobilize APSA's large member base in a way that will enact a positive impact on the campus community?
Oh, there's a lot in there, but
I can read it.
Yeah, it's okay. So I guess, at least in terms of what the board's already a part of, for example, I know Internal Affairs VP is a representative for Student Diversity Commission, and also now that we have the APITA Resource Center, we're able to utilize that as a resource when connecting to campus and making our voices heard. But in other ways, I would encourage the board members, and also just as leading by example, to take on a more active role when it comes to things like AS, for example, and various student forums and open discussions, because while in relation to APSA, it helps represent the community of APITA, in the end, it's also your voice as a student, and that's how it would directly affect you, because APSA is a student organization. You're a student first. So while we are able to help bring our voices as API individuals into the campus community, it's also just to have our voices heard as students in general.
Third question is, what is the difference between a good president and a great president? What are the qualities and attributes that distinguish these two?
So how I like to think of this is so good president versus great president is similar to how you, so how do you see a good friend versus a great friend, right? So a good president would simply do what's expected of them, be nice, or remind people to do this and do that, and you say all the right things. You're going through the motions, you're fulfilling your bylaws, you're going through the checklist, 1, 2, 3. And in the end of the year, you'd be able to say that you completed it. But a great president, they'll also be able to do their duties, but a great president is willing to sit down with you through the hard times and remind you that it's more than just what you did, but the lasting impact that these things have on the members, like the GBMers. And also, a great president doesn't just do it because it's expected of them, it's because they want to. So it's more of the impact that they leave with the people that they surround. Yeah.
Then for your fourth question, being the president requires you to remain impartial when making decisions. As a human being, you will always have your own biases. How are you going to remain impartial while having these biases, especially when disputes get emotional?
To start with the emotional part, I always believe that it's best to take some time in between when you start to recognize either like myself or another person being emotional, because like my mom usually says, it's you don't want to talk right now because you might say something you might regret, that kind of thing. And because of that added emotional aspect, you might start reflecting these biases at a more extreme nature. So while you may have biases, what's important is that you recognize and acknowledge them. And so from then that's when there's growth, because if you know you have the biases and you do nothing to try and like learn from it and keep an open mind from other people's perspectives, then that's when you're not able to learn, and then you just hit a wall. So then there's no proper communication, and it's more like you're yelling at each other instead of listening and hearing each other out.
And your last question, cement question is, it's easy to say that everything is going smoothly. What are you willing to do to ensure that the well-being of your future, what are you willing to do to ensure that, ensure the well-being of your future board members?
So when I was on board, I remember the advisors had attempted to make one-on-ones with the board members, but considering that there's supposed to be like a second step, I would want to connect with each board member as how they see comfortable, and ask them how they would like to be led, so that I can understand how they are as a leader, because with 17 people on a board, you're not going to know how everyone works and functions. And like the same way with anyone else that you're going to meet, you have to understand how to interact with them personally. So I would say, what was the second half of the question again?
The second half was, what are you willing to do to ensure the well-being of your future board members?
The check-ins, and I would make sure to make it regular and not like I got to meet with all 17 of them and it's like one and done, but because making like mental health and well-being and like constant growth, it's constant, so you have to constantly be checking in with people, even constantly checking in on yourself. So it's important to be able to have that communication with the members, so that it doesn't create a distance or worse, a wall between you and your board members.
Thank you.
Thank you.